Hi everyone, my name's Rachel and I'm the dietitian with the New Challenges Tribal Council. And today I'm very excited because I have Fiona Devereaux here with me and we're going to talk about food security. So Fiona is a daughter, sister, and auntie, a white settler who lives in Metulia, Victoria Homelands of the Lkwungen speaking people. She has had the honor to work in food on the island alongside some of the nations as a registered dietitian in Indigenous Health with Island Health. She's a lover of plants, nature, and food, and now works in cultural safety and continues to be passionate about Indigenous food security and sovereignty. So Fiona, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah. So first, maybe Fiona, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your love of food and maybe what you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, nice. Oh gosh, where do you start with your love of food? I loved when you and Jesse were talking the other day, just the how important food is at bringing people together. It's just such a connector. And I grew up with a mom who really showed her love with food. So she loved cooking for us. And I always remember you'd be eating and she'd just laugh and be like, "Do you like it? Do you
Oh.
like it?" And of course, like she'd spend all this time cooking and were we giving her the positive feedback, right? So just for me, that idea of love. So I can see that same thing in me, is that I like to cook for people or connect or bring people together through food. And I also like really need to eat. Like I get hypoglycemic if I don't eat, so hangry or hungro.
Yep.
So food to me is also really medicinal. It always has been. My body just really needs food regularly. And so I've always had this really like kinship, like, thank you for nourishing me and taking care of my body, because I'm also not very nice if I'm hungry.
Yes, I can relate to that.
Yeah. So that I can remember even from an early child, like 5. If I didn't have something, I could feel my body shaking. And so just that gratitude, that deep gratitude. And through my years working with, of course, Indigenous communities and through the communities helping me decolonize and really heal, part of that was a deep kind of connection to plants.
Mhm.
And that helped heal my relationship to so many things, but especially the land. And so a lot of my spare time in these last couple of years has been trying to deepen my connection and understanding of how to tend and care for plants and care for ecosystems. And then, with the time of COVID, I've always had a beautiful garden and a beautiful space. But I've also really always grown things that are easy, like raspberries or blueberries, kale or lettuce. So I'm really this year focusing on trying to be just more food secure personally and get some more food in the garden. But really, if you look out at my garden now, a lot of the plants are medicinal. I've got like a nettle patch, or I have my medicinal herbs down one garden because they grow here. They grow so well. This is their ecosystem that they love so well. So I try to find that balance of planting food, kind of more modern colonial food, with then of course the medicinal ones and the native ones that are here that thrive here. And so you feel very confident
Yeah.
that you can do a good job in that. So food takes up like my personal time and used to be most of my professional time. But for me also, something I do every day is hike. And so we have a beautiful mountain here called Pacals, and I probably hike that 5 times a week. And
Wow.
it keeps me well and keeps me connected. And I actually, sadly enough, do the same loop. And that came from one of my plant teachers. So now I can watch the plants in each season and
Oh,
really start to connect to a place. And I really love seeing and touching the same trees and plants and talking to them and seeing them shift from season to season. So
great
yeah.
idea. That's a great way to get familiar with plants and
Mhm.
know them through their life cycle.
Yeah, and then like love their little life cycles.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's also really inspiring what you said about planting native plants because they grow really well around here. So the nettles and the raspberries you mentioned, is there anything else in your garden?
Well, I'm just trying to propagate some plantain because I really like to use it medicinally for any wounds and stuff. And so I've been trying to nurture some of that. A plant that the local people here have shared with me is called Lkwungen, or Indian consumption plant, or Indian celery seed. And it's very endangered. And so I want to start trying to grow it in my garden. Um,
Wow.
Yarrow, I have yarrow patch.
Nice.
Calendula. I'm trying to work on a chamomile because I fell in love with chamomile over the last couple of years. So yeah, I'm trying to think. There's so many
Miner's
plants
lettuce?
out
You have
there.
miner's lettuce in your garden?
Oh yes, it's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, lemon balm, miner's lettuce. I should just go outside. And there's garlic. Yeah. So even baby violets right now. It's violet season, and so I have a few violets. Um, And I like the both. Like I love having the bounty of the raspberries, just so bountiful in that July time. And then right now nettle is just ending or starting to end. And I've had like 5 harvests off my little
Wow.
patch. So it's just, yeah, it's kind of, and that my little nettle patch it's me, I don't know how long it is. It's not huge, but it started from one little baby that an elder gifted me, and I just plopped it in and it just grew. So
Wow, that's really amazing.
yeah, and now like I have to kind of cut it at a point because it's starting to cruise the corner. And yeah, just that's so amazing to see how it thrives so well.
And how do you like to eat your nettle?
Well, when it first starts to come, it's just so great. And I try to use the top 2 segments for food during that first month. And then the second month or so, I use it for tea,
Nice.
which I like. So the first month, I might blenderize it in my blender and put it in ice cubes to have in my smoothies throughout the year. And
Great.
then, of course, make pesto.
Yep.
But I also, the cubes I use for smoothies, I might add it to soup. I might add it to stews through the winter time. So right now I have 2 massive freezer bags just full of little nettle
Nice.
cubes. I also blenderized up some chickweed and cleaver and violet and miner's lettuce into some cubes too, just because, yeah, sometimes you run out of the greens in the winter month, and if you can just grab that ice cube and add it into your, get that vital, beautiful nutrition that spring brings, that cleansing. I always think of spring, it's like helps with your digestion and it kind of opens you up. So yeah.
Great tips. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm so excited to get out into my garden now.
We're so grateful for this space. Yeah.
So for those who are watching that may not know what food security is and why it's important, can you give us a little bit on that? And also, what do you think we could all be doing or working towards to help support food security in our communities and to eliminate hunger and dependency?
Gosh, there's so many ways to answer that question. For me, food security, I feel like it's really important to kind of look at it from like all the different social, political, environmental, cultural things that have happened to especially Indigenous people on these lands. But all of us that have created kind of a dependency on this big food kind of system that we call like the grocery stores. And so it's kind of taken our personal autonomy, where many people have actively engaged in their food security throughout the day or throughout the week, and through so many colonial practices, so much harm. It's been kind of that food sovereignty, that self-determination has been taken away, and we've created these industries of food production. And so to me, there's like short-term food security, medium term, and there's like long-term food security. So right now with COVID, there was like a lot of fear that people might not have enough food to eat in their immediate week.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that actually is common for many people living on these lands, that there's a deep worry about how much food they have in their cupboards or if food will last. And that one of the things that I heard over my career in nutrition was how families, and especially moms, would not eat to ensure that their children had enough food. And how in a world can we allow that to happen? Or kids going to school hungry. So there's like immediate, like we need to make sure there's food in people's houses. And so that's kind of where things like food banks have evolved from, to kind of just provide people with that immediate support.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is we need to be getting thinkers and governments and people that support food security to start looking at the medium and the long-term supports. And what was kind of interesting for me after 20 years trying to work in food is as soon as COVID kind of hit, we started hearing people talk about long-term, more food security in your immediate household or your immediate community, instead of this dependency on these systems of like grocery stores, or that we'd have to buy food, that there could be this food that's close to home. And Indigenous communities know this so well when we think about shellfish, and we think about seafood, and we think about when food fish comes in. And I heard this in the immediate weeks after COVID, is that fishermen were going out and getting food for the whole community. I saw some pictures when Say Out, there was some prawns getting brought in, and people were just so grateful. And so we think about how there's that collective. We're thinking of the community, we're getting food for all. So sometimes I hope that we can start to look at creating, when we think about how things used to be, there was jobs in food distribution, food gathering, food harvesting. And those positions have been then kind of taken into that more grocery store. And we don't see like, I'm the food person for my people. And so I'm going to help coordinate with the fisherman or the shellfish harvester or the medicine person and start to provide foods for community in a more of a community focused way, which we know that happened in the past, and through colonization and through the creation of the reserve system, the Indian Act, all those things have created that disconnection. And so I'm hoping that there can be some curiosity and opportunity to look at those people that have those skills, those amazing skills, and how we can bring the youth and the next generation in that. And you see families doing that, taking their kids, engaging them in that knowledge transfer. But how do we do it I know that there's concerns about the contamination, also access, the amount of food, over harvesting. And so how do we do this in a good way? But there also needs to be some equity, right? So lots of times commercial fishing continues, but Indigenous food fishing is stopped. And so whose rights here are being held up? And so looking at it on looking at it from a whole bunch of systems levels. And here in the South Island, it's been really powerful for me to learn the issues on the clam gardens or the shellfish or the beaches, when elders have shared that when the tide is out, the table is set. And they're like, Fiona, I used to eat there every day, and that is where I want to get my food. And then we get told, you can't because of paralytic shellfish poisoning, or it's closed due to red tide. Or then you hear, oh, it's closed due to agricultural runoff because of E. coli. People have mentored me and helped me see is be curious about these blanket closures. Like, is the beach unsafe to harvest 12 months a year? Or are there more times? And what we hear is there's no money to do the contamination testing. So it's easier to do these blanket closures, but then there's it's that dominant food system saying, well, you could just go to the grocery store, instead of like honoring that this food system has been around for 15,000 years and we need to hold it up support it. And if it needs cleaning up, we need to look at that. But this idea that you just close all the beaches down and people cannot access food, nourishing food that would support their people long term is just so curious to me. And I think an example of that is, from a dietitian perspective, we recommend vitamin D.
Yeah.
And then, so, you'd think, well, eat fish. And then people either say they can't afford fish, so that in individual community-based insecurity. But so one group is saying, eat fish, like nutrition, and eat, it's really good for you. You need your vitamin D. But then there's like a misconnection. And then they're like, oh, we'll just take a vitamin D supplement if you don't have access to fish. And you're just like, oh no, what are we doing?
Yeah, I think you just hit so many points there, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. But I can definitely relate to your last point there, the vitamin D thing. It's something that we talk about all the time, the importance of vitamin D, but it's like, okay, well, where can we get it? Because there's not enough fish in the ocean, maybe for all of us to be eating salmon X amount of days per week. And where did people traditionally get their vitamin D? Maybe it was from Lkwungen grease or seal blubber and things that aren't as available anymore. And there's so many reasons why they aren't available, lifestyle, but also availability and other kind of blockades along the way. So licensing or pollution, whatever it is. So yeah, food security is such a huge issue, and I'm so glad that we can talk about it today and help everyone that's watching kind of understand how complex it is.
Yeah, it's just so interesting too, because there's the word food security, and then there's the word food sovereignty, right? And so, and I think it's a really that idea of self-determination and Indigenous rights is also really an important thing for, especially me as a settler, but also settler governments to just consider whose land we're on and the inequities that have been created over the generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And you touched on some of the work you did as a dietitian, but I'm wondering, what other work did you do while you had your role as a dietitian with Indigenous Health? And then now that you're working in cultural safety, how has your role changed?
Yeah. Wow, I had such an amazing career. Gosh, it feels like such a journey. And sometimes a bit of shame comes up, and feelings of just such deep gratitude, because sometimes I really feel I got more out of my role than I ever could have contributed to the communities because of, and I even just get emotional because I just learned so much about who I am and the work I do. And it was also a lot of fun, and I think that's one thing. I think food can be so fun and connecting. But what are some of the things we did? Some of the things when I'm quiet with myself and I just think, wow, that was so wonderful. I started a project with a group of people in this area called Feasting for Change. And really the elders asked us in the South Island to, we brought them together, kind of just had a feast and set the table with the old food. And I thought they might want to have a traditional foods conference. And they were like, no, we don't want to travel too far. We want this. Come to the local communities and just set the table with the old food and let's eat together. And it was so brilliant and so simple, minus sometimes accessing the food and getting that all together. But then when you have crab and you have hihua, the sea eggs, or you have kwakmis, or you have all these foods, you have to cook them.
Yeah.
And what was great is we would do a lot of it outside and ensure the kids were there so the knowledge transfer would happen.
Wow.
And that went on for many, many years. But through that, relationships were built up and down the island, and the same energy was bubbling out in the Nuu-chah-nulth territory. And I met some amazing people in that territory. And we started the Indigenous Food Network and started hosting gatherings, ironically, up and down the island. And there was just, each one was so beautiful and highlighted the foods of, I remember there was a day at Lkwungen, Speaking People's Homelands, and I had to have 2 dinner plates because there was 18 different Indigenous foods served that night.
Wow.
And so just the bounty and the generosity of the food was so good. So there was a lot of those events where we got to connect and showcase the wealth of knowledge in the communities and the beauty of the food that the true Indigenous foods of these lands. And then one of my most learning projects was the Youth Digital Harvest Project, where we got youth to create videos about who they are on the land and then a food interest of theirs. But to be able to work and learn with youth blew my mind. And then they presented and shared their videos at one of the food gatherings. And I'm still in contact with many of the youth from that, and just the power of relationships and connections as well. And so, those are some highlights. And then in the latter years, that's when I started to open up to really trying to learn about the plants and medicines. And we did some like train the trainers, where we got to learn from each other and learn about herbal medicine and plants and the plants of these lands, and we did it together. So there was a group about 15 to 20 of us over a couple years that got to really kind of deepen our understanding. And I really enjoyed that kind of train the trainer model, which was really wonderful as well. And then as I decolonized and started to understand my role as a settler in colonization and how the power dynamic plays, I started to see that I could maybe support the food system and the food sector in Victoria to really start to look at the power imbalances, like who was getting the funding, who was always getting their voices heard, who was even at the table, and then also who was not at the table. Okay. And so starting to really showcase some of the inequities that we see. And that's where my team in Island Health was also supporting my decolonizing journey. And I was starting to bring some of that learning into the food sector in Victoria. So doing some deep, deep learning on white power, white privilege, and how the structural inequities around food security funding and food security program were just perpetuating the inequities and leaving out of Indigenous peoples, and we're on their land, right? So it was always just like, what are we doing? And so that I really started to deepen my connection to that work, and saw an opportunity to maybe try deepening my skills in that. And so I moved into a cultural safety position within Island Health, freeing up the nutrition position. So we're just hiring for the nutrition role. It's been sadly taken a while to get that position up and running, but that's going to happen soon. Awesome. And so that's exciting. And so how has my role changed? Well, I would say in my nutrition role, I got to work in community all the time. I got to be out of the office, out of the structures and systems of healthcare. Mm-hmm. And what I heard through my career is how unsafe healthcare is, right? And how the system of white supremacy, how it sets up these hospital systems, isn't safe. And I reflected on my learning and how it shifted me. And I thought passionately, I really wanted to try and see if I could start to shift the structure of healthcare. So now I'm working within the system of the hospital system, working with all levels of leadership to support them in the same journey that I went on. And so I'm hoping to still be able to connect with the food sector in some ways. I'm also working with the food services department within Island Health to just support their learning, because we know that sometimes that hospital food isn't nourishing. Yeah. In many, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Yeah. So we're just starting on that journey of building a relationship with that team, and so I'm excited about that. And so I'm still figuring it out. It's only been 8 months, and I feel like I have a lot to learn. I know I'll be continuing to learn my whole life. But that's kind of the difference in the two roles right now. And I can't wait till the dietitian comes on and we can work together, and then I can support her in the cultural safety stuff, and she can just get connected with the communities and
Yeah.
have a great time. Yeah.
Wow, that's really great to hear your journey through your position as a dietitian and how it kind of evolved and kind of led you into this role in cultural safety where you
Yeah.
are now. And I know the dietitian community really misses you. So I'm glad that you're still around and agreeing to do things like this with us.
Well, it was kind of sweet with COVID. You know, basically we were all encouraged to jump in where we knew we could. And I could see my team, like one of our nurses started working in home care right away to make sure the elders were safe. And there was just some flexibility to be able to come back and just make sure that the community, and I really, I'm curious to see how this might unfold and how the roles could be kind of working together.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
with the onset of COVID, is there anything specific you've been working on with other dietitians that work in Indigenous health?
yeah, they're with dietitians, but also the food sector, like really just trying to connect with people, learn to see what emergency planning was happening, what the communities, like what the health directors might need.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Immediately, we kind of knew there'd be a lot of funding coming down. And so we created a document that could just talk to communities what some short-term food security solutions could be, what some medium and long-term ones could be, and with a focus on trying to get them to think to those medium and long-term
Yeah.
ones. And so examples like short-term could be making sure there's weekly food boxes, that there might be some food fish coming in, or communities are so creative they could have defined what would work for them. Where the medium and long-term could have been like, well, let's start a garden, or let's hire, with the money that's coming through COVID, let's hire a position for someone to regularly support the food work in their communities. Because one position I know over these years, those health directors, they are amazing human beings and they have a great team working underneath them, but there's a lot of pressure on them to do all things. And so could we get to a place on the island where there's actually, like, around the social determinants of health and around health and wellness, these food positions? So could it be teaching cooking? Could it be getting food into the nation? Could it be canning? Could it be preserving? Like, and of course each community would define what would work well for them, but is there a way that we hold up food as a basic human right, and we need to have these social, cultural, community supports around food instead of it always being just on the individual?
Yeah.
So how do we do this more in a community-based way?
Yeah. And I think you're right at the end as well. After all COVID passes, all these things that have been set in place because of COVID, I think will only positively benefit the community. And I think other things as well, like as an example, what we're doing right now during this COVID time, like being able to connect and share information in a digital way. So that's one other good thing that's going to come out of the COVID. But that's great. And thank you for supporting all of us dietitians through this time. You've helped me a lot.
Well, I love you.
So just a few more questions. So I just wanted to know what some examples could be of communities that have created initiatives to address food security. And then any tips you have for community members that are watching for what they can do to help initiate change.
Oh, wow. God, there's so many communities doing such great work. And again, I've been out of the loop-ish a bit. You know, I think of people that come to mind just because I have deep relationship with them, or people like Mary Hayes at Sartlip First Nation and her like 18-year commitment to food work in her Head Start program. And to create, like, I think how many years ago now, it might be 5, where she finally had a community garden space, and she's got the little ones out there planting pumpkins, and she's got the native plants, and she does the food boxes. And I just sometimes I wonder if she gets sleep, but I always just am inspired by her passion for food. And that shows the power of a position. So yes, she's the Head Start coordinator and does all the work for kids, but because she understands or has a deep passion for food, lots of her program is food-based. And so Sartlipp's lucky. They have someone that really loves food that much, but sometimes I think it's that important part about food being in the job description, you know, part of the work, instead of these amazing humans that are doing it off the side of their desk.
Yeah.
But definitely check out Sartlipp. And in that same area is the Papakan Hayout project, the blossoming place, where they've taken plant education, native plant, and modern plant gardening, and the kids come out and learn on the land with elder and the community. And it's really great out at the tribal school. Again, they're fully immersed in Sinchothan, so everything is translated into Sinchothan, so it's quite powerful to have, yeah, of course, that connection. I mean, everything in Sinchothan is probably way more meaningful than the English translation. And the second person that always comes to mind, and again, I'm of course South Island centric here, so there's so many amazing people up and down the island, but is Jared Williams, Quina State, or I'm not going to be able to say his name right. It just left me. Sorry, Jared. But just again, full-time position. He's a Red Seal chef, and he's cooking and caring for the elders. I think 3 days a week they come, or is it every day they come down for food? And then he's also harvesting and preparing medicines for his nation. And I could see him still on Facebook set up as soon as COVID hit. They were packing, you know, meal bags or good food boxes. And I think he was making like 10,000 buns or something, like amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just, again, and I think that's why I'm so curious about this idea, how we could shift consciousness to pay for food work. And it be sustainable, because so often it's 1 year, 2 years. And how do we start to shift the consciousness of policymakers, decision makers, to see the importance that food is community and food is wellness, and this idea of families struggling to feed and kids not getting the nourishment they need. Like I go back to my dietitian brain when I think about kids not getting nourishment, like they're growing their brain from 0 to 5. And I mean, of course, until 18 and 19 as well, but their little brain. So how is food not a human right? Like access to good, nourishing food for all. So how can communities, that was the second part of the question?
Yeah, anyone that's watching, what can they do? Some small steps, just, you know, there's thinking today, I want to start working towards this. What's something they could just work on?
Maybe they could just plant a nettle plant. Just
I love that idea.
No, pick a dandelion. No, just kidding. One thing that I always I'm grateful for is that message that food is medicine. And so in any way, your food is medicine to you, and to remind yourself that you're worth it, you know, your nourishment. And so taking that time to nourish you in any way that feels like, I always think to, like, how did that food make me feel? You know, and connecting to the medicine of how important food is. It goes back to my upbringing as well. My mom always made homemade soup. Like it was some Saturday and Sunday, there was always like a pot on the stove, and every recipe was different. It was funny. She could never make the same soup twice, because she was just using what was out of the fridge. And then one day my elementary school asked my mom to come in and make soup, and I was super embarrassed, because I'm like, what 8-year-old wants to eat soup? Because like other moms were coming in and making chocolate chip cookies and cinnamon buns, and then my mom was the most popular mom that like super funny, and everyone was like, oh my God, your mom's soup was so good. And then I remember about 2 years ago, I was cooking soup with the tribal kid, the high school, and they loved the soup, and I was just laughing, and I was like, soup. And I just think that sometimes we think food needs to be fancy or elaborate or expensive, and just throwing a pot of soup on and just making up good old soup, and then the smell, the eating together, the power of just connecting. Jessie, was it with you in the video where Jessie shared the story of her grandma and the fry bread?
Yes.
Like, oh, I was watching that yesterday and I was just like, yes.
Yeah.
Like, how do we create these relationships through food? And so it could be starting to try and put some plants in the garden and just connect and see them grow and try to have some success. I mean, my confidence built with the raspberries, because you can't really mess up raspberries. And so building that confidence with whatever you're doing and then moving on to the next thing. And then, I mean, of course, communities have voice, advocating for food supports to their leadership, and then connecting with us as dietitian professionals. And if we can support funding or linking them to whatever we can do to support and advocate for the shift, because it's a mind shift.
Yeah.
I think food has been kind of not seen as that, again, human right. And we need to start kind of just shaking things up here and being like, hello.
Yeah.
So
I do remember you saying once in another webinar I watched with you, finding that food that makes your heart sing.
Oh yeah.
I really loved that. And I think I remember for you it was potato, but for some people it could be salmon. And how does that make you feel, and really thinking about how you feel when you're eating that food. And I also really like what you said about how food is wellness and food is community. I think that's so important, and I definitely resonate with that. So thank you so much for sharing all your
anytime.
knowledge. I'm so happy that we get to put this video out there and people get to hear your words.
Well, and I do just want to end with thanking everybody up and down the island, and so many beautiful Nuu-chah-nulth people that were kind enough to share with me about food and help me heal that connection to the land and heal myself. And just, that is generous. And so lots of what I share is really just from people that were kind enough to share with me. So I'm always grateful. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. So many amazing Nuu-chah-nulth knowledge keepers and foodies and food lovers. Yeah, amazing.
Well, you're lucky. I'm jealous that you're out there, and I can't wait. We did plan maybe that we'd come visit in May.
Yes.
I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
So
No.
We will definitely, next time Elise is up, and we'll grab Robin and we'll come for a road trip.
That would be amazing. Maybe some late summer harvesting, hopefully.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much. This was amazing. Well, hopefully we can do this again.
Yes, anytime. And bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.